In Harbor Heights, where homes are as meticulously arranged as the social order, Emily Thompson was notorious for her relentless enforcement of community rules. What she wasn't known for was her ability to tell the difference between actual violations and innocent burger bitesa distinction that would turn out to be unexpectedly significant. On that bright Saturday in July, my name is Sarah Mitchell, 38, a high school history teacher, an unwilling spectator to what my students would later call the Great Harbor Heights burger blow-up. I'd moved back to my childhood town last year when my dad, at 74, started having minor health issues after Mom passed away. Nothing major, just the kind of things that made me feel better being 20 minutes away instead of 3 states apart. My dad, Dr. Robert Mitchell, a retired corporate lawyer with degrees from Harvard and Stanford, refused to downsize from the 4-bedroom colonial where I grew up. "This is home, Sarah," he'd said when I suggested a condo might be easier. 42 years of memories, your mother's garden, the height markers on the kitchen door frame. I'm not leaving until they carry me out feet first. Dad had mostly flown under Emily's radar, partly because his property was flawlessly maintained, a holdover from his corporate days, and partly because he avoided the social politics of Harbor Heights. He walked his golden retriever, Bella, twice daily, tended Mom's rose garden, and occasionally hosted his chess club, all activities well within the Harbor Heights acceptable behavior range. Until the burger. The incident happened during Harbor Heights' annual 4th of July celebration in the community park. The HOA supplied hamburgers and hot dogs, with residents bringing sides and desserts to share. Dad and I arrived fashionably late and found the party in full swing. We filled our plates and settled at a picnic table near the playground so Dad could watch the grandkids of his chess buddies darting around the slide. As Dad lifted his burger for another bite, a shadow loomed over us. I looked up to see Emily Thompson standing there, her expression suggesting she'd just found something nasty on her pristine sneakers. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Dad while ignoring me. "Perhaps you're unaware, but food consumption is restricted to designated eating areas." Dad glanced around. We were at a picnic table, surrounded by others eating. "I'm sorry, I thought this was a designated eating area," he replied calmly. "It's a picnic table." Emily's smile tightened. "The designated eating areas are marked with blue tablecloths. This table is in the playground zone. Section 8.3 of the event guidelines clearly states no food is permitted within 20 feet of playground equipment." Dad lowered his burger, looking puzzled. "I don't recall seeing that guideline before. Is it new?" "It was approved at the May board meeting and detailed in the June newsletter," Emily replied with smug satisfaction. "Page 4, if you'd bothered to read it." I felt a familiar surge of annoyance. Emily had a knack for making reasonable requests sound like personal attacks. Before I could speak, Dad nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, we're almost done. Would it be okay if we finished our meal here? It'd only be a few more minutes." Emily's expression hardened. "Rules apply to everyone, regardless of age or status. If we made exceptions, we'd have chaos." Dad glanced at the kids playing nearby, none of whom were eating or cared about our table. "I understand the principle, but surely some flexibility." "No exceptions," Emily interrupted. "Either move to a designated area or dispose of your food immediately." I'd had enough. "Emily, we're talking about a burger, not toxic waste. Dad's knees are bothering him today, and we're settled here." "I don't make the rules, Sarah. I enforce them," Emily replied with rehearsed superiority. Dad placed a calming hand on my arm, always the diplomat. "It's okay, Sarah. We can move." He started gathering his plate and napkins. What happened next unfolded so fast that witnesses later gave conflicting stories. As Dad stood, balancing his plate and drink while stepping around the picnic table bench, Emily reached for his burger. Whether to grab it or point at it became a neighborhood debate for months. The sudden move startled Dad, who instinctively pulled back. The burger patty slipped from its bun, soared in a perfect arc, and landed with a wet smack on Emily's immaculate white capris, leaving a vibrant ketchup and mustard splatter across her thigh. Time froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the kids paused, sensing the shift. Emily stood motionless, mouth agape, staring at the red and yellow stains spreading across her pricey pants. "You did that on purpose," she finally gasped, her voice hitting a pitch that startled a nearby bird. "You food vandal." Dad, horrified, reached for a napkin. Emily, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Let me help. Don't touch me. She stepped back, pointing a shaking finger. This is assault, food-based assault. I'm filing an incident report. Emily, Dad tried again, his voice steady despite the absurdity. It was clearly an accident. I'll pay for dry cleaning. But Emily was beyond reason, her face a furious red clashing with the condiments. The board will hear about this. There will be consequences. She spun on her heel and marched toward the clubhouse, leaving whispers and stifled laughter in her wake. The first official shot in what neighbors called the condiment war arrived 3 days later. A formal violation notice taped to Dad's front door, citing intentional food misuse resulting in property damage and failure to comply with event zoning regulations. It demanded Dad pay $175 for Emily's ruined capris, plus a $50 fine for the zoning violation. This is absurd, I said as Dad read it aloud during our weekly dinner. She can't expect you to pay for an accident she caused by grabbing your food. Dad adjusted his reading glasses, studying the notice like it was a legal brief. The violation cites HOA bylaw 22.7, but that covers exterior holiday decorations, not food at events. Does that surprise you? Emily's never let facts get in her way, I said. What's interesting, Dad continued, is that this notice has the HOA letterhead but lacks the required approval signature from the board president or compliance committee chair. Technically, it's unofficial. I rolled my eyes. So she's not just pettish skipping protocol. Apparently, Dad set the notice aside. I'll call David tomorrow and sort this out. David Lee, the HOA president and a retired engineer, usually took a more balanced approach than Emily. But when Dad called the next morning, he learned David and his wife were on a 3-week cruise to Hawaii. His voicemail named Emily Thompson as acting president in his absence. Well, that complicates things, Dad said when he told me. I'll need to handle this differently. Dad drafted a formal response to the violation notice, politely declining to pay, citing the accidental nature of the incident and the incorrect bylaw reference. He hand-delivered it to the HOA office, where Emily's assistant accepted it with clear unease. 2 days later, a second notice arrived, citing the correct bylaw on community event rules but raising the fine to $75 for failure to promptly comply with HOA directives. A handwritten note read, "Further delays will result in additional penalties." What followed was a strange escalation of bureaucratic battles. Each time Dad responded with a calm, legally sound rebuttal, Emily issued a new citation with higher fines. By the third notice, she'd added historical pattern of noncompliance, despite Dad's spotless record over 4 decades. She's inventing violations now. I fumed after the fourth notice, which threatened a lien on Dad's property if the $375 in fines weren't paid within 10 days. This is harassment. Dad stayed oddly calm. She's making procedural mistakes in every notice, failing to provide appeal information, citing fake bylaws, issuing threats without board approval. She's building a case, just not the one she thinks. Things took a darker turn when Emily started canvassing the neighborhood, telling residents Dad was mentally declining and suggesting his food assault proved he couldn't live independently. Mrs. Callahan, Dad's 82-year-old neighbor and chess partner, called to warn us after Emily's visit. She had the gall to ask if I'd noticed confusion or aggression from Robert. Mrs. Callahan said, outraged. I told her the only confusion is why anyone voted her onto the board. The tension peaked when Emily, using her temporary authority, called an emergency board meeting to address ongoing compliance issues and potential safety concerns. The meeting was set for a Tuesday evening at the Harbor Heights Clubhouse, with Mitchell property violations as the main topic. She's really doing this, I said, staring at the meeting notice. She's dragging the whole board into this without waiting for David to return. Dad checked his calendar thoughtfully. Tuesday at 7 p.m. That works perfectly. You're actually going to this circus? Of course, he replied, a small smile forming. I wouldn't miss it. The Harbor Heights Clubhouse was unusually packed for a Tuesday board meeting. Word had spread about Emily's crusade against the Burger Bandit, as some younger residents dubbed Dad, to his amusement. The room buzzed with whispers and speculation. Emily entered at exactly 7 p.m., flanked by two board members who looked uneasy with the turnout. She wore a navy blazer with a gold HOA pin and carried a thick binder with the Harbor Heights logo. Her expression flickered with surprise, then satisfaction, when she spotted Dad in the audience. "Good evening," she began, her voice dripping with forced warmth that grated on me. "Due to President Lee's absence, I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. We have several matters to discuss, but first, I'd like to address an issue that sparked considerable community interest." She paused, savoring the drama. "As many of you know, there was an unfortunate incident at our 4th of July celebration involving a resident who deliberately damaged another resident's property with food and has since refused to make restitution." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dad sat still, his face neutral. Emily continued, "While we usually handle compliance issues privately, the repeated refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing, combined with concerning behavioral patterns that may indicate broader issues, requires board intervention." She opened her binder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've documented 5 violation notices issued to Robert Mitchell over the past 2 weeks, none addressed appropriately. Additionally, several residents have raised concerns about Mr. Mitchell's recent behavior and decision-making capacity." The murmurs grew louder, with clear sounds of dissent from parts of the room. Mrs. Callahan, seated behind us, let out an audible scoff. Emily raised her voice. "Therefore, I recommend the board approve an official censure, apply the accumulated fines to Mr. Mitchell's HOA account, and establish a 3-month probationary period where further violations would lead to harsher penalties." She looked at Dad. "Would you like to address these issues before the board votes, Mr. Mitchell?" Dad stood slowly, smoothing his slacks. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I would indeed." He walked to the front with calm dignity, nodding to neighbors as he passed. At the podium, he pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket, unfolded it, and set it down. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Robert Mitchell. I've lived in Harbor Heights for 42 years, raised my daughter here, and served on various committees." His voice was steady, the same tone he'd used in high-stakes boardrooms. "Currently, I chair the HOA Legal Committee, a role I've held for 8 years. Emily's head jerked up, her eyes widening. She clearly hadn't linked Robert Mitchell to Dr. Robert Mitchell, JD, Legal Committee Head. Dad continued, "I'd like to address Ms. Thompson's concerns systematically. First, the July 4th incident was plainly an accident, witnessed by over a dozen residents, several of whom provided written statements." He nodded toward Mrs. Callahan, who held up a folder with a grin. "Second, the violation notices contained significant procedural errors, rendering them invalid under our bylaws. They were issued without proper authorization, cite incorrect or non-existent regulations, fail to provide mandated appeal information, and escalate penalties without board approval, all direct violations of HOA procedures." Dad paused, letting his words sink in. Emily's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty, then to dawning dread. "Third, and most troubling," Dad said, his voice sharpening, "Ms. Thompson has engaged in a systematic campaign to undermine my reputation with false claims about my mental competence statements that constitute defamation under state law and elder discrimination under federal housing regulations." The room fell silent, even the kids in the next room quieting. As legal committee chair, I must inform the board that Ms. Thompson's actions expose the HOA to significant liability. Should this continue, I'd have no choice but to recommend retaining outside counsel to address potential legal consequences. Dad looked at Emily, his expression not angry but almost pitying. "However, I believe this can be resolved simply, without escalation. I propose all invalid notices be withdrawn, Ms. Thompson issue a public apology for the citations and defamatory statements, and the board review our compliance procedures to prevent future issues." He folded his paper and pocketed it. "Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions." Silence broke into slow-building applause, starting with Mrs. Callahan and spreading until most of the room joined in. Emily stood frozen, her case crumbling. The aftermath, dubbed the Burger Hearing, reshaped Harbor Heights. David Lee returned from his cruise to find a changed community and a pile of incident reports. After reviewing evidence and consulting Dad, he called an official board meeting. Emily was absent, citing personal obligations. The board unanimously voted to invalidate all notices issued during David's absence, establish clearer protocols for temporary leadership, and create an ethics committee to review compliance procedures. Dad was asked to chair the new committee but declined, suggesting it might seem vindictive. The goal isn't to punish Emily, he told me. It's to fix the system that let this happen. He recommended a diverse committee of longtime residents, newcomers, families, and seniors. The board agreed but insisted he serve as an advisor for his legal expertise. Emily's public apology was brief, lawyer-crafted to admit procedural oversights and regret statements that may have been misinterpreted about Dr. Mitchell's capabilities. It satisfied the board's requirements. Surprisingly, Emily announced she wouldn't seek re-election when her term ended in 3 months. Rumors swirled that her husband's job was moving them to Denver, a convenient exit from the community's shifted view of her. For weeks, neighbors visited Dad with cookies, offers to help with yard work, or just to talk. Many shared stories of Emily's overzealous enforcement, revealing a broader pattern. You know what's ironic? Mrs. Callahan said during a chess game. Emily was obsessed with property values, but couldn't see she was hurting something more valuable: our sense of community. Dad nodded. Neighborhoods are more than real estate. They're social ecosystems. When rules become weapons, the whole system suffers. A year later, Harbor Heights held its 4th of July celebration in the community park, organized by the new Community Engagement Committee, which replaced Emily's rigid event planning group. The changes were clear. Food tables were scattered freely. Kids ran between play areas and picnic tables without crossing invisible lines, and neighbors who'd barely spoken during Emily's reign chatted openly. Dad and I arrived early, as he'd been asked to speak briefly. At 75, he showed no signs of slowing, still walking Bella, tending Mom's roses, and serving as Harbor Heights' unofficial elder statesman. His only nod to last year's drama was choosing a hot dog over a burger, which he insisted was just preference, not trauma. David Lee opened with a short speech on community spirit, then introduced Dad to light applause and playful burger jokes. Dad approached the microphone with easy dignity. A year ago, I stood in this park holding a burger that unexpectedly changed Harbor Heights, he began, drawing laughs. Not because the burger was special, but because it sparked a conversation about what kind of community we want to be. He gestured at the relaxed gathering. Look at us today, kids playing freely, neighbors connecting across generations and backgrounds, a community defined not by strict rules, but by mutual respect and care. His tone grew reflective. My late wife used to say a neighborhood's true measure isn't its property values or uniformity, but how it handles adversity, how neighbors support each other through challenges, big and small. Dad smiled, eyes crinkling. So as we celebrate Independence Day, let's also celebrate our interdependence, our connection as neighbors and friends. And remember, sometimes the most important community discussions start in unexpected ways, even with a burger. As the afternoon unfolded, I watched Dad engage with neighbors, advising a young couple on their deck plans, debating soccer with the middle schoolers next door, reminiscing with seniors about Harbor Heights' early days. In every moment, I saw what made him a natural leader: his focus on people over policies, his belief that rules should serve communities, not control them. You know the real irony, he said as we walked home. Emily was right about one thing: community standards matter. She just missed what the most important ones are. Which are? I asked. Kindness, flexibility, perspective, he said, smiling. The understanding that sometimes a burger is just a burger, not an assault weapon or a violation of section whatever. I laughed. Pretty sure that's not in the bylaws. Maybe it should be, he replied. The burger clause. In all enforcement actions, board members shall first consider whether they're making a mountain out of a molehill or a federal case out of a patty.